Maybe now it's safe to order out for some pizzas.
No need, dudes. I brought back some takeout, so let's get down and pig out.
It's Shredder!
Where? Where?
I'll be honest, of all the franchise anniversaries happening this year, I thought I'd be talking about Transformers first. Don't get me wrong, I do have plans to talk about it, and some others, but those are gonna have to be for another time. As for the topic at hand, it's one I'm surprised I'm talking about at all. Don't get me wrong, I like the Ninja Turtles, but a lot of the toy lines that are put out just don't really appeal to me for a variety of reasons. Super 7's line is a neat throwback to the original toy line from the 80s, but that's a throwback that's completely lost on me as I never grew up with it. Plus those figures are really expensive for what they are. The NECA line has a great amount of variety, from the comics to the live-action movies to the 80s cartoon, but those lines have also been running for multiple years now, and back collecting is so pricey that I'd rather not bother. The Mezco figures look really impressive, but yeah, no thanks. And then there's Playmates, who are really good as a cheap alternative, but again, it's not really one I'm very interested in. I haven't watched a lot of the more recent Ninja Turtles stuff, so I never bothered with them. At least not until now. These are Playmates' 40th Anniversary's original sketch versions of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We've got Leo, and Donnie, and Raph, and...
Good grief, he's naked!
So as you might expect, these guys are based off of this drawing right here for what would eventually become the Mirage comics. They're pretty close to what that finalized design would be. The classic mean mug is there, as is the anatomically appropriate but seemingly always phallic looking tails, but there are differences. Leo is the only one who has knee pads, everybody else goes without them, and Mikey doesn't have a belt of any kind, which unintentionally makes him look like a streaker. Although I guess they've always kind of looked like that when you think about it, but never mind. But those are just minor things. The actual big difference is proportions. These guys are a lot shorter, stockier, and just a bit more cartoonish than what they would eventually become. And it's a difference that I honestly really like for just how unique it is, relatively speaking. Don't get me wrong, the Turtles have always had varying designs. The series has not been afraid to change them up dramatically, especially in Rise. But even with these changes, their proportions have always stuck to being very human. Exaggerated, yes, but still human in general shape. These guys, with their thin necks going to big heads and purely cylindrical legs, give a very different feel from what the others have, and I quite like it as its own thing. Paint-wise, these guys are pretty much what you would expect. It's standard Turtles colors, and I think it looks pretty good. No real chipping, no bleed, it's all solid. I do think, though, that it doesn't do a whole lot to bring out the details within the sculpt itself. And there's some little etch marks on the chest to represent the sort of comic hatching that was done, but they're not doing a whole lot if you ask me. A wash would have really brought out the details, but for the relative price, I can't really complain too much. And besides, there's also a black and white version, so if you want a version of them in true comic fashion, I suppose, or if you want one as more custom fodder, you can go for those guys. So overall, the Turtles look really good and the paint is pretty solid. But looking good is only half of the equation, so let's look at the accessories. Oh, right. Okay, let's just cover the boring stuff first, I guess. So each turtle comes with a canister of ooze. It's kind of weird looking though, isn't it? But that's on purpose because it's meant to house this cardstock. It has the original sketch printed onto it, and that looks okay. It looks pretty decent. But why give us 4 of them? What am I going to do with all 4 of these? I guess this is just in case someone decides to only pick up 1 turtle, which makes sense, but I can't really see many collectors doing that, so let's just feels like an extra bit of plastic that's just gonna be lying around in my shelf somewhere. Now, whatever, it's not a big deal. Moving right along though, we have the diorama pieces. Some assembly is required, but it's pretty basic stuff, and it looks really good. We'll come back to the diorama in a moment. Let's move on though to these turtles' weapons. Not a crazy amount to say here if I'm being honest. They look pretty much exactly as you would expect them to. Raph does come with an extra sword though, because that's what he had in the sketch. Just a recolor of Leo's though, looks about as good as his as well. I only have 2 issues with the weapons though. For starters, if Donnie's bowstaff isn't plugged in properly, it is extremely loose. Now, once it is plugged in, obviously it's not a problem, but just keep that in mind and make sure that you have it properly set inside of his hands. The other thing comes with weapon storage. Obviously all the turtles can store their weapons on their person, but Mikey's nunchucks are put on his forearms. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but having his nunchucks there means that you can't use his wrist joint in any way, as doing so will just bump them out of place. Not a big deal, just keep that in mind. But seeing as how I'm on the wrist joints, let me point out something that I was actually pleasantly surprised by. Now, I wasn't expecting a whole lot articulation-wise. At this price point, most figures either have extremely limited articulation, or what articulation they do have is supported by rather flimsy joints that makes posing them not that fun. There are exceptions to this obviously, but typically speaking, that's how I find it to be. And that rigidity is certainly true as far as the legs go. The hips are only pinned in rather than being on ball joints, so you don't get a crazy amount of movement with them. However, the upper body is fantastic for what it is. I do wish the necks were ball jointed as opposed to being hinged swivels, but the overall articulation scheme with the head and the arms is pretty great, doing everything you would need it to do at this price range. Now, are you going to be able to get some crazy, super dynamic posing like you would with more expensive figures? No. Not really, but what you do get is still solid, and you can get a lot of nice poses that give a lot of personality to these guys. And if we bring that diorama back in, you'll find that there is just enough posability within the turtles to recreate that original sketch pose for pose. God damn, that looks really nice, I cannot lie. A fantastic looking display piece. Honestly, you could leave them like this on your shelf and I don't think you would have any real complaints. Let's say you want these guys posed with other figures in your collection. Well, you'll be happy to know that they'll fit in there just fine. Coming in at 11.5 centimeters, these guys will work well with any 1/12 or even 1/10 display. And for the sake of showing them off with some Ninja Turtle stuff that I do have, here they are with the NECA Last Ronin, and more appropriately, the NECA Mirage Comics Master Splinter. Oh, they look so good with him, don't they? I actually wasn't gonna pick up Splinter, but they had him on sale at GameStop and I figured, why not? So whether you're a casual fan or a hardcore fan, I'd recommend picking these guys up. Right now, they only go for about 20 Canadian dollars each, which is a steal of a price for what you're getting. So I'd say pick them up sooner rather than later. But that's all I've got to say on them, and all I've got to say about the franchise right now. Like I said, not a whole lot of Ninja Turtle stuff coming out is really interesting me. Maybe I'll look at Party Wagon later down the road, but I think I can say with confidence that I'm not going to be picking up any more Ninja Turtle stuff for the foreseeable future. Motherfuck!